Hi, everybody. Welcome to another election edition of Keep Talking. The fervor and color when India votes is palpable and it is unique, and we've already begun experiencing it if you're following the news cycle. And it's overwhelming, the amount of news that's coming out. But one bit of news last week is going to be really interesting to watch, and that is the fact that two political parties, not one, but two national political parties, the CPIM and the Congress Party, in their manifestos have both committed to delivering or offering fuller, if not full rights to India's queer community. To assess the implications of this, I am delighted to say that I am talking to Rohin Bhatt, Supreme Court advocate, and a very forthright and passionate champion of queer rights. Rohin, I'm delighted that you could make time to talk to us.
Thank you for having me.
So, is it a historic moment, or am I reading too much into it?
No, I think it is a historic moment. I think until this election, the speaking of queer rights issues was a political faux pas. And to have two major national parties out of six national parties come out and say, look, this is what we are offering, right? It is a historic moment, but it's going to be much more so into ensuring that it is going to take much more advocacy in ensuring that these don't remain at manifesto levels. But having said that, let's not take away from the moment.
We should cherish the moment, isn't it? Because it is, I mean, never before in India's elections, we are voting for the 18th Lok Sabha election starting the 19th, and you've never heard political parties talk or say the word LGBTQ.
Well, yes and no. I think it's not as if they've never said it. If you look at Pink List India, which is a database created by Anish Gawande and Smriti Deora, they've been tracking politicians who've made utterances either positive or negative or neutral on queer rights issues. And when you go through the database, a surprising thing that comes across is that a lot of individual candidates have been speaking about queer rights issues. What we've not seen is that actually kind of precipitating into a wider national conversation. Why is it happening this time? If I were to take a guess, I would say there are two major issues. One is that queer people post 2018 are becoming more and more visible, right? Why did it not happen in 2019? I guess because the judgment in 2018 had just come in September of 2018. And then we just ran 6 months later into elections. Queer people have had more time now, given that 5 years have passed, to become more visible, to have their stories put out post decriminalization, and so on. The second reason why this has happened is that post the marriage equality case, right?
Yes.
A case which was being live streamed, right? This became a bedroom conversation. This became a dinner table conversation for people because of the live streaming of the case. And that spurred a massive widespread debate that was hitherto unseen, even during the previous cases of decriminalization or the trans rights case in 2014. There were discussions, but I think it was the nature of the live stream of the proceedings, and the highlights coming out at the end of the every day on YouTube, on social media, being played on television. I think that is what has kind of mainstreamed these conversations, and that is why we find them in manifestos this time.
I want you to weigh in on whether the majority, which is represented in parliament, especially if you have majority governments like we have right now at the moment, can majorities be expected to look out for the welfare of minorities? So if you were to put it simply, to a young person watching this, what is it that they should expect from majority governments and from majority, therefore, in society?
I think nothing. I think rights are never given, they are fought for and they are won. Now, let's be clear. In the 75-year republic, and the 75 years of our republic and of our parliament, we've not had one openly queer person elected to the parliament. We've had people elected to as MLAs, we've had people elected to the local bodies. But in our national parliament, we've not had one openly queer person, right? So what happens then is that when the lawmaking happens, as was the case with, say, for example, the Trans Act of 2019, it misses out on so many lived realities of queer lives. Of and then what it results in is that the community is not satisfied with the law that is passed, which then kind of manifests itself into challenges to the constitutional validity of it. And more often than not, if I were to hazard a guess, I would say that this law would be struck down for the asking, based on Supreme Court's own decisions on how transgender people are to be treated. So this is what happens, And look, conversations in Parliament are dying down. Bills are being bulldozed, right? So there's a conversation to be had about what the Parliament is actually doing. Is the Parliament truly acting as a body that analyzes bills properly? Less and less bills are being sent to standing committees, less and less bills are being discussed in standing committees. With the very nature of standing committees, right? Is now becoming more and more polarized as compared to a few years ago when even in NDA 1, you would see cross benches camaraderie in committee, right? We saw what happened with Mahua's expulsion.
Yeah.
And that's just one of the high profile things that plays out. But I think the committees are becoming more polarized. The parliament is becoming more polarized. The body politic of this country is becoming more polarized. And as that happens, without representation, I think nothing can be achieved. Look, this is 10% by conservative estimates. So 20
Is it
to
10%? Yeah, because I think you wrote in your recent article for the Times of India, isn't it?
Yes, 10% is what 7 to 10% is what the Supreme Court says in Navjot Singh Johar. But if you look at the global trends, it's far more. It's 20 to 30, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that also, and that this difference kind of comes in for a variety of factors, from homophobia to people not wanting to come out of the closet. If it is 10% by conservative estimate and 20 to 30% by juxtaposition of global figures, then I think 10%, 1/5, and 1/3, all these three, no matter what figure you stick to, are major chunks of your population that are not represented in parliament. And I think that is a very, very worrying trend. That is a trend for the community to kind of mobilize itself politically. And post 2018, we've perhaps focused our attention too much towards victory in courts.
But actually, all rights have to the gay community or to the LGBTQ community in India have come through the courts, isn't it?
They have.
Yeah.
And I think a part of that is that we have never had queer people in parliament as a
So
part of the reason.
is the moment now that you've got these two manifestos talking and making commitments, and then do you expect queer candidates being put up?
Well, look, that's not for me to say. That's for the parties to decide. I'm a nobody. But having said that, one is always hopeful that openly queer candidates will be contested. I know fantastic people in both of these parties who are openly queer and have been a part of these parties, and I hope that they get their due.
The political community and the business community are the last bastions where people are still keeping their, sexual orientation private, and which is fair. That's your right. But whether it's the legal fraternity, the entertainment industry, fashion, you look media, you look at so many communities where people are now openly gay or lesbian, or bi or whatever. But whatever their sexual orientation is and their gender orientation is, they are open about it, and that has had a fabulous positive impact, isn't it?
Yes, and I think it's also in politics. We have some fantastic politicians who are openly out and queer. But we've had national spokesperson who are trans. We've had people in the Professionals Congress. We've had people in the Communist Party who are openly queer. And so I think it's just about whether who gets to be mainstreamed. And I think that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
Let's not, kind of say that people are not openly queer in politics. There are openly queer politicians in this country today that I know of. But perhaps the spotlight is not on them. For various reasons.
Okay, so Rohin, now let's go through point by point in what both the manifestos offer, and let's start with the CPIM one because that's a little more detailed, and it came out first, even if it's just by a day. So the first thing that the CPIM says is amend the Transgender Persons Act of 2019 to address concerns raised by the community. So this is a big yes and a good point, isn't it? Because you've raised concerns about the existing Transgender Act.
Well, I think, if you're going to amend this act, I don't think the act can be saved. Let me start with that. This act has to go. There's no doubt about it.
It's to be
We need a
replaced.
fresh act, right? Let's start with the fact that this act was done without any community consultations.
Okay.
All the concerns that were raised by the community are ex post facto. So this act needs to go. There's no amending, there's no saving the act. Every section has 10 problems with it. So I don't think this act can stay. I think this act has to go. But I think this is still better than keeping this act in place. I think an amendment is still a good way to go about it.
Okay. The second point that the CPIM says in its manifesto, a comprehensive anti-discriminatory bill covering the LGBTQIA community.
Sounds good as a promise, but until you have the text of the bill in front of you, it's very difficult to comment on, the shortfalls. But again, a very promising
and necessary. You need this
and necessary, very necessary.
Right. Reservation in education institutions, ensuring horizontal reservation in employment.
Now, horizontal reservation has been a long-standing demand of the trans community, which has now kind of gained political momentum. It started off even prior to NALSA in 2009, 10, 11, spearheaded by this one woman, trans woman, Grace Banu in Tamil Nadu. And she's been tirelessly advocating for it within political parties, within legal circles, within public policy domain. Now, my problem with this is they've said reservation in education institutions and horizontal reservations in employment. Now, horizontal reservations, if you know your history of politics, you know that the women's reservation bill did not get passed because some parties objected to the reservations not being horizontal. When the first bill was passed, I think Mr. Lalu Prasad Yadav objected to it for the first instance. So any reservation has to be horizontal. It's already been done for women in some states. It's been done with people with disabilities. And I think it's only logical that it moves on to the trans community.
Let's go to the next point, and that is ensuring crimes against LGBTQ plus persons are treated on par with crimes against non-LGBTQ plus persons. What? I mean, I'm sorry if I sound completely ignorant, but why do you even have to say this? What's the difference in the crimes
You have to
committed?
say this because the Transgender Act says under Section 18 that if you endanger the life, safety, health, well-being, whether mental or physical, of a transgender person, or if you cause, say, physical abuse or sexual abuse or verbal, emotional, economic abuse, you shall only be imprisoned for a term between 6 months and 2 years, right? This with a penalty for rape under Section 375, which is much more and even can, lead to a death penalty. My reservations about the death penalty aside, there is a vast gap between how the Trans Act treats sexual abuse or physical abuse towards trans people versus how the IPC treats it against women.
And then measures to address bullying, violence, and harassment of gender, non-conforming and LGBTQI students, staff, and teachers in educational spaces, enforcement of UGC anti-ragging policy amendment 2016 that addresses ragging based on sexual orientation and gender identity, ensuring accessible and safe bathrooms for trans, intersex, and gender non-conforming students, staff, and faculty. I think this should get a big nod from you because you brought this up or parts of this up in your piece, in your recent piece, isn't it?
Yes, I think this deserves, at least the latter part deserves commendations and bouquets for bringing this up and making it an election issue. But like the anti-discrimination bill, unless you have the measures in front of you, you can't look at whether they're adequate or not. Now, look, I'm also kind of coming at this from a point of somebody who will not take imperfections in the law. And the nature of my job is such that the first thing one looks for is an imperfection in the laws, either to manipulate it to your advantage or disadvantage. So that is where I'm coming at it from.
Sure.
These are very promising promises. I don't want to take away from that.
Then they have on their list is sex change surgeries of LGBTQI should not be done without their informed consent.
I think very important, and I think very, very well put, because we've seen in intersex children surgeries happening when the child is just, a few days or a few months old. We've seen surgeries performed on trans people that I know personally without their consent by doctors. So I think this is very important. Currently, you only have it declared as a medical malpractice by the Madras High Court and the National Medical Council. But, so many of these operate outside regular allopathic medicine, through homeopathy, through Ayurveda, through tantrics, and through babas who want to change of all religions, not necessarily Hindu babas, but also Maulvis, Christian priests. So I think this is very important.
So legal recognition and protection to same-sex couples similar to marriage, civil union, same-sex partnerships, legislation on similar lines as the Special Marriage Act 1954, so that the partner can be listed as a dependent for inheritance, alimony in the case of a divorce, etc.
Why not marriage? Why do you want to give us something that is marriage but not marriage? Right? So both the Congress and the CPI have said civil unions, but none of them have said marriage.
And that hurts, right? Still, because
of course it does.
The ultimate
you are still kind of excluded from the mainstream right to marry, and you're forced to use a separate law, a separate institution. My guess is it will be used to give an inferior treatment, because otherwise, why not bring it within the purview of the Special Marriage Act? Right? Special Marriage Act is a religion agnostic law. It is secular. It doesn't require religion, nor does it create something very similar to a civil union, but albeit under the garb of marriage. Then why not extend it to queer couples too?
Just using that term marriage would go a long way in society, isn't it? In terms of acceptance.
It would. But again, I think a lot of people within the community have taken umbrage to using the word marriage because of the connotations in terms of caste endogamy, which I fully agree with. But I think for equal treatment, civil unions are an important step, but that's not the end goal. The end goal is being treated at par. Let's look at what the Congress Party offers. And in the first chapter, which is on equity, it has a section for senior citizens, persons with disability, and LGBTQIA. I don't know why these three groups are together, whatever the reasons. What the Congress Manifesto says is we will expand Articles 15 and 16 of the Constitution to prohibit discrimination on the ground of disability, impairment, or sexual orientation. And then it also says, after wide consultation, Congress will bring a law to recognize civil unions between couples belonging to the LGBTQIA plus community. Now, the question is, this seems to be less and definitely less detailed than what the communists are offering, A. And B, it says after wide consultation. Is that sort of hedging? Is that sort of keeping it all open, saying, sort of being a bit equivocal? Let's deal first with after wide consultation, right? Yeah. It could be seen as a cop-out. Yeah. But number two is, I think, what has happened, and as it came out during the marriage equality verdict, right? There are a plethora of views about equality. So, sure. And it's, well, in a democracy, sure, let everybody have their say, but at the end of the day, what has to kind of prevail is the Constitution. So, and the Constitution guarantees equality. So let everybody have their say, but at the end of the day, I think, given how complex an area of law is, ranging from income tax to social security laws to labor laws to disability laws, 180 different statutes, So you do require wide consultation with the stakeholders, and that does not necessarily only mean religious groups, but also disability groups, also different consultations within the queer community. Look, the queer community is not a monolith. There is wide opposition to the issue of marriage within the community as well, and rightfully so.
You're saying that I might be taking a cynical view if I look at after wide consultation, with some
No, it's not too
skepticism.
cynical. No, 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 it's not cynical. I would use the word cynical, but I think let's give them a
Skeptical.
charitable extension of our faith, and let's hope that this is what they meant, that they want to look at opposition to marriage within and outside the queer community. Now, the second issue of our
Yeah.
expanding Article 15, I think the queer rights movement and the disability movement have long been allies, just as the queer movement and the feminist movement have been. Uh, Fascinatingly, it is, I guess, because historically both these communities have been kind of uh, perceived as being different, quote unquote, either because of your disability or because of your sexuality. And so the capricious silence that we've witnessed in terms of in politics and in lawmaking, even a lot of people have issues with the Disability Rights Act, the activists that I've spoken to. So, you know, but in terms of, which is why they are branded together. Now, why have they put senior citizens in is something I did not understand at first glance, and I have no idea why.
Yeah. I mean, it probably doesn't mean anything, or
Well, I wouldn't say it doesn't mean anything. Look, the Congress manifesto was drafted by Mr. Chidambaram. He's the head of the drafting committee. So nothing there, I would assume, given his meticulous nature, has happened without meaning
he's from
anything.
your fraternity, isn't he? A leading light of
A
the
leading
legal.
light indeed. So I don't think it is put in there just for the sake of it. But let me make a broader point that it means that the scope of the constitutional right to equality is being expanded, right? The scope of, and I think that paves way for more challenges, which is why if I were to advocate for either of these manifestos, I think the Congress manifesto, without uh, doing so much, does so much, because then once the equality is granted in the constitution and there is a prohibition of discrimination constitutionally, then your subsequent fights kind of are empowered by the constitution. You don't have to do the legal acrobatics that we now have to do.
Through our conversation, you've been saying that uh, the queer community is not a monolithic community. There are different identities, different views, different opinions, and fairly so. Now, the question is, do you see it as a voting bloc, a 10% population? I remember in the run up to the 2019 elections, I did a conversation with a farm leader in Maharashtra, and there was huge agrarian distress before those elections. And he actually told me, he said that, farmers don't vote as a bloc. They are divided largely by regional, religious, and caste identities. Do we see the queer community as a bloc?
No, we don't. I don't think it's fair to do that. I think to this day you have queer people uh that support the BJP despite its dubious record, right? You have people who support the Congress, you have people who support the communists, and you have people who support all parties. A lot of us have kind of stopped voting along, and not just queer people, but a broader politics where mandir and masjid politics dominate the day. And that's true for queer people also. There are people who I know, right, who are queer and went to the Ram Mandir Pran Pratishtha. So
Yeah.
I don't think it's a monolith, and nor do I think it is a single vote bank yet. Could we see that changing in future? I think uh, Maybe,
But
maybe not.
at this juncture, when the fight is for full rights, would there be more unity, let's say? Could there be more unity when
I
the
don't think so.
is for full rights for yourself?
I don't think so, because
How interesting.
the polarization is there, right?
Yeah.
People who have been historically voting for the BJP will continue to vote for the BJP for reasons best known to them, despite what uh, they say in court, what they say outside, right? So I don't think it's a monolith, nor do I think it should be. I think as queer people, we must celebrate all differences,
Sure.
uh, and a variety of opinions should be celebrated. But at the end of the day, I think we must all remember that the only thread that binds us all is the Constitution, and whether uh, you are a political party or member of a political party, or whether you are a member of parliament or you are a common voter. I think when one goes to vote, one must keep one thing in mind: is who has the most fidelity to the Constitution. And I think that's the only thing that matters to me in a broader scheme.
You talked about the fact that these were only two out of the six national parties that have come out with their manifestos, and we are waiting for the others. Do you expect the kind of feedback or a little bit of attention that this commitment to queer rights or furthering queer rights that the CPIM and the Congress have made? Do you see anything else happen, in the Aam Aadmi Party's manifesto, or most critically, the BJP's manifesto? Do you see
Well,
a
we
positive
haven't
difference?
heard anything in the public domain. So, and I am a glass half empty kind of a person. Life has made me so. So, unless I see something and unless I see promises like this, I'm going to hold my horses. But
Fair enough.
I think it's still important that a third of the national political parties have kind of gone out and put their necks out for the community. And I think that is in part due
It's
to
a historic.
it is a historic point, and I think the credit for it goes to people who've been working behind the scenes in all these parties.
Rohin, given that you're a glass half empty kind of person, and given that these are just manifesto commitments at this point of time, and come June 4th, which is counting day, and the results of who will be the next government will be known to us, and given that this is historic, how do you proceed? How does one proceed, especially if you're part of the queer community?
Well, first of all, one proceeds by registering to vote and actually going down and voting. That's the first part. But the second, I think, is remembering that no matter which government is in power, we are still going to be policed for our food, for our dress, for our writing, for our orientation, for our gender identity by the society, the government, and the state. So the fight for equality never gets over. Even within the community, we've had people saying, oh, don't force intersectionality down our throats. We've had at Pride marches, people being handed over to the police, and then police going on and filing an FIR for sedition. We've had a variety of problems even within the queer community. The fight for equality, I think, is the one that is eternal. Uh, you keep on fighting, you keep on advocating for changes, no matter who's in power. Maybe, if you have a government that is perhaps more uh, recipient to your ideas, then you advocate within the government. If you don't, then you take your fights on the streets or you take it in court. But the advocacy has to continue. The methods of advocacy will change. The where do we advocate changes, but the advocacy doesn't stop, and it has to start advocating for yourself by starting to vote.
That's the perfect way to end this conversation, Rohin. I really enjoyed it, and I must admit that there are many parts of this conversation for which I'll have to look up and understand better. But I think it's really important for us to speak to people like you, because to understand the law is really important. And I hope we can continue this dialogue. And maybe one day, and in one of those forthcoming dialogues in the future, you will go from being a person who sees life as half empty, the glass half empty, to the glass half full.
Well, even that is a glass half full view. So I wouldn't hedge my bets on myself if I were you. But on that note, thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much, Rohin. Wish you a lot of good luck. We'll keep talking. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.